Well, let's jump right in. So, Anne, thank you for being here. This
Thank
is
you for
about,
having me.
if you want to introduce yourself first, you can tell us a little bit about your story and your writing path and how you wrote this book. I'll let you take the
Okay.
beginning.
I'm Ann Leckie. I am probably most famous for being the author of Ancillary Justice, which won a number of awards, which was super exciting and very hallucinatory while it was happening. Um, but other people may know my voice from when I was an associate editor at Podcastle, and introduced a lot of episodes. And that was weird. I would go to conventions and I would say something and people would go, "Oh, I know who you are." And I wasn't famous for anything except that. That wasn't even very famous. It was just odd. At any rate, uh, Translation State, which is my most recent book, is set in the same universe as Ancillary Justice, but it's not a direct sequel. It doesn't have like the same characters. So that is Translation State involves a juvenile Presger translator who people who have read the trilogy know. They met some Presger translators in the second and third books of the trilogy, Ancillary Sword and Ancillary Mercy, and I decided to continue to play with those characters because they were just so much fun. So that's basically what that book is. I actually started out being told by my parents that I was going to be a writer, which is exceedingly unusual. My parents were all for that, and so they spent a lot of time explaining to me like how to format a manuscript, which was a whole thing on a typewriter. And which was how I learned to format a manuscript on a typewriter, how to submit manuscripts. My parents were scientists and they submitted articles to academic journals, but many of the practices were the same. They told me I would need to have a day job to support myself, but I was going to be a writer. It's quite a gift. I've learned since that many folks' families actually aren't enthusiastic when someone says, "I want to be a writer." Nobody says, "All right, honey, here's what you need to do." They're like, "No, that's ridiculous. Go be an engineer, or be a doctor, or you better learn to wait tables because that's just stupid." Um, I would encourage anybody here anybody listening who has responsibility for young folks to please be supportive of that kind of thing, even if it doesn't make money. There are ways to do artistic things and not make money, and it just makes people's lives better. And please support that. At any rate, it was a long time before I really felt like I could sit down and write, for various reasons. And so it wasn't until I actually had little kids, and my little kids, they were the most adorable little kids in the history of little kids. I will fight you. It's true. Nobody else's babies were as cute as my babies, or ever will be. But my brains were leaking out my ears staying at home with the kids. I had to do something to keep my brain working. And so that was when I sat down and started to really seriously write. I'd taken a couple of false passes at it before. Um, it took me a few years before I sold a story, and then it took me a number of years before I sold my first novel, which fortunately did very well. I will say it was not the first novel that I wrote. It was the third novel that I wrote. So aspiring writers, or writers who are before the selling things part of your journey, don't despair, just keep doing the work. So that's basically my story.
Thank you, Anne. I'll leave it to Jen or Brian if you have a question. I have a couple questions, but Jen, do you want to begin with the roundtable format?
Oh, sure. I well, first let me say I love this universe you've created. I've read the trilogy and Provenance, and now this book. And I know you have a short story collection coming out, and I think it's not just about this, but it might have a story about this universe in it, or no?
It has a couple stories. Many of the stories that are in the collection are available online, but of course it's far more convenient to just have the collection.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things, there are at least two, I think there's two stories in this universe, in the collection. When I was selling short fiction, I discovered very quickly that editors would buy fantasy from me, but not science fiction. And so most of the stories in the collection are actually in the same universe as the Raven Tower.
Oh, interesting. I haven't been able to read that yet, so I'm really looking forward to reading the collection. Yeah. Going forward, do you think you'd write more fantasy or focus on science fiction, or just go back and forth between both?
I probably will go back and forth between both. I know that my publisher would much prefer that I just keep churning out Imperial Radch novels. And I mean, I can't argue with that. There are not many writers who are in that situation, so I'm not going to complain. On the other hand, the fantasy, I've really enjoyed the fantasy. And so I will probably go back to it at some point.
Do you find it easier or like writing in one genre over another?
I don't think I don't want to start a fight. This is the way to start a fight on the internet. I don't think science fiction and fantasy are fundamentally different. I think they represent different aesthetic choices, and the aesthetic choices in science fiction tend to make it easier to talk about certain specific things. And the aesthetic choices of fantasy tend to make it easier to talk about other related specific things. But you can absolutely, and people have very frequently, used fantasy to talk about the impact of technology on society, for instance. You can use science fiction to talk about poetic and emotional things, or to talk about how we view the past. I don't think they're very different. The one thing for me where science fiction and fantasy is very different is that it's much easier for me to make a concrete setting. That's a very technical thing. So I've never been inside a space station. So if I want to talk about my space station, I have to build it literally from the ground up in my mind. I have to think about what the materials are and what the textures are. But if I'm in a castle, I can go look at a freaking castle. I can pick from thousands of castles and decide which one I want to steal for my story. The same for oceans and islands and farms and houses and food. And, I can just steal those, just lift them from Earth. And I can't do that as frequently with particularly space-based science fiction. So for me, that's actually the big difference between the two.
Okay. Thank you.
Brian, if you're still half asleep, you can pass if you don't have a question, or if you need to get coffee. But if you have a question, you can ask it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually haven't stayed up all night, so not having that coffee. I figured it was more likely for me to stay up than it was for me to wake up early.
Know thyself.
Yeah. Pardon the noise. The way I stayed up was by going to a concert downtown. So if there's cars driving by, hopefully they don't block me out. I was actually wondering, with Translation State, I haven't read the other trilogy, but with Translation State, there was a lot of focus on how language is used to kind of create meaning and connect in connection with people's like histories, with their pasts of, finding, who people are, and all these questions of identity, and how do people find belonging. This is something that I think about a lot out here. I've been in Taiwan for 6 years now, but looking at the different ways that they use language out here, because there's a big mix between Mandarin and some like indigenous languages and Southern Chinese dialects, and the way that people use this language to determine, not only like what do they use on a day-to-day basis, but how do they use it to determine who they are and what their identity is. And yeah, I guess my question is like, how did you kind of get into that? Because there's a lot of that in the novel, of people define themselves like, no, this is who I am, and the language that was used kind of to define them, and who their families are, what their history is, all of that. I thought was really interesting. So I was just kind of wondering how you got into that, and how did you incorporate that into the novel?
So some of it is sort of an outgrowth from things that I discovered while I was writing the Ancillary trilogy. I started writing the Ancillary trilogy thinking, oh, this is going to be a fun adventure, but I ended up having to listen to conversations about things where I learned a lot of stuff. I learned a lot of things about, I listened to a lot of people talk about the way they experience their gender, for instance. And that was super interesting. I already was interested in language. That's something that comes up actually in the fantasy stories a lot. The fantasy stories are almost all explicitly about ways you can manipulate things using language. Because that's set in a universe where gods exist, but the way gods make things happen is they say a thing. And if it's their power will make it true, but there's a sort of, conservation of matter and energy still exists. So if you don't have enough power to make something true, it'll keep draining power from you and possibly kill you. So if you're a god, you have to be very careful about what you say, right? But that's more complicated than it seems. And so that's something that's already really has interested me to the point that I've written numerous short stories and an entire novel about it. I also come at it from the point of view of my mom was adopted. And one of the things that was really interesting to me, it was frustrating when I was a kid. Now I find it interesting. The interesting thing was the number of kids, other kids my age, who I would say, oh yeah, my mom was adopted. And they would say, oh, do you know who your real grandparents are? And I would be like, those are my real grandparents. I don't know who my biological grandparents are. But that's a whole other thing. But the people around me couldn't even process that. Like that wasn't even a thing in their minds. So that's already someplace where that's something I was thinking about in Provenance very much, right? Jen, who's read Provenance, knows that is a big part of Provenance. And so the things that I got from talking to readers about ancillary justice and the things there from my own history and my already interest in sort of linguistic questions sort of all came together. The situation in Taiwan, of course, is very fraught and complicated. And that is just super interesting. We often think we don't have a situation like in the US. It's not like that. We all speak English, but in fact, we don't all speak English in the US. And not only do we not all speak English, we don't all speak the same kind of English. And people have the option of, as you say, choosing a certain kind of speech to show who they are, choosing a certain kind of speech to communicate something about who they are to somebody else, those may not be the same thing, right? Choosing a kind of speech to hide what you are so that nobody bothers you. Those are really complicated and cool things, aren't they? But it's a much bigger and more obviously fraught issue in Taiwan. As you know, I'm telling you this, you live there.
The political situation here is something, but I've found it really interesting. It's surprisingly actually difficult to find like English translations of a lot of local like Taiwanese literature. The government started some new programs the last 10 years or so, I think, to start publishing some of these in translation to English, just to build connections to the international community, which is really cool. But yeah, it's been because there's so many, all the indigenous languages, the Southern Chinese, well, they call them dialects. They're really just not the same as Mandarin at all, right? So, but yeah, looking at all these different things and seeing, okay, how do people express themselves and the importance of, language and constructing like, a past for us it's really kind of crazy, like how important just the words we use are in shaping our histories and our present and, our potentials for the future.
And the story you tell about your past is really important. I mean, people kill each other over what story you're telling about the past, right?
Right. Yeah, I thought all the connections. Sorry, so all the sections with the like Hokipi language and like the songs that they're singing at some of these gatherings and everything. When they're trying to install Reet as like a kind of a figurehead, right? I thought that was really interesting how they're like, oh, this language like brings it in and like this language like does this and creates our history and this is who we are. And I was like, wow, this is how there's a lot of like really deep real life connections, but there's a lot of political as well as personal information. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and in that one in particular, another thing, although depends on how much you pay attention to British Isles ethnicities, but my surname would not suggest this, but I grew up Irish Catholic, identifying as Irish Catholic. And so, in fact, I was thinking of the kinds of things that American Irish Catholics do to sort of solidify their identity as Irish Catholic. A lot of that went into building that little, that most of them aren't funneling money to the IRA. That's not, first of all, that's not as much of a thing as it used to be, thank goodness. But secondly, even back in the day, it was happening, but not, but those gatherings, I was trying to get how those gatherings felt to me, because you're absolutely right. That's very much what those are about. It's like, this is our connection. This is how we know what community we belong to, that we don't want to lose track of. We want to make it solid.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. This discussion we just had actually segues into what I wanted to ask you, Anne. Like Brian, I haven't read the trilogy yet, so this question may show my ignorance with something you may have already explored. But the politics of this book, and when Brian mentioned Reet, I love the detail at the end when there's the knife, when he has the knife against his neck and he starts singing the song, because that got at the violence and the identity. I just love that. Like, he's like, oh, if I sing this song, they won't.
I'll prove I'm one of you.
Prove that
Yeah.
I'm with you. Like using art to try and prevent someone from murdering you. It was just a nice detail. But I love all the political maneuvering around Reet and who he was, and am I pronouncing it right? Kven,
Kven, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my question is, did you have the political structure in mind and the roles that would play in that political structure before you wrote this book? And that's why me not reading the trilogy, I might be ignorant, already had a lot of the politics beforehand, and then you created characters to fit into those political chess pieces, or was it a process that you started to create the characters and then fit them into the politics? Like, how did you make the politics work with your characters, is what?
So it was sort of a combination, because the events in the trilogy are very much sort of behind all the things that happen in translation state. So all of that was stuff that I had to account for. So all of the Radch characters are reacting to what happened in the trilogy, particularly Semet, who is not as stupid as she appears. She just does a stupid thing because she's desperate, and her whole world is falling apart. And the Presger translators also, Leckie and Zayat, who are mentioned but never on stage in translation state, are on stage in Ancillary Sword and Ancillary Mercy. So those characters were already a given. But I talked a big game about the treaty in the trilogy, but I never had to actually sit down and say, well, if we have to actually interact with the treaty, what's that going to look like? And so I kind of had to build that to, so that I could put my characters into it. I knew my three characters. I knew who they were going to be, but I kind of had to build things up for them once I got there. But I knew that was where I was going. So it was really just a question of specifics. But it's very much sort of a combination, sort of step by step. I write a scene and then I'm like, okay, now that scene establishes this. Well, then what does that mean for what's come? Oh, now I have to make sure that, well, are they going to do this like a committee? Is it going to be a tribunal? Is it going to be, how is it? I ended up reading a bunch of things about courtroom process, in different places. Because I'm used to the way they do it in the US and the UK. Those are unrelated systems of law, but other European countries actually do it quite differently. And so I sort of looked at those and I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to have to build something out of these pieces. But every step sort of then opened up another set of things that I would have to put together.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, because that courtroom conference scene was brilliant in that Reet was saying, this is what I want, this is who I am, and then someone else saying, no, it's your duty to do this and not break the treaty here, and you really moved through those conflicts really well. And then so yeah, I was wondering if you had built the treaty before or after, but it sounds like you did it right. You had to do it during the
Yeah,
writing of
the
this book.
specifics, I had to build them there. You can't beat a good courtroom scene. A really good courtroom scene is like often one of the best parts of a book. You read have you read Swords Point?
No.
Swords Point has a great courtroom scene. Man, and Swords Point's a great book. Ellen Kushner. You absolutely, if you haven't read Swords Point. Um, and of course a mystery novel, tons of mystery novels have great courtroom scenes. Like they're made for drama, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. So I'll bring it back to Jen. I have some more questions, but I'll bring it back to Jen if you have a question you'd like to ask.
Oh, I'm terrible at coming up with questions, so I'll let you, and you have several, so go for it.
Yeah. So another part of the book, Anne, that I really enjoyed was the mystery of the Presgers, right?
Oh, the Presger.
Presgers.
Yeah.
And again, this may show my ignorance with not having read the trilogy. Um, but well, first I'll ask you what they are and how they got there and their past. Is that explained in the trilogy?
No.
Okay. Then I like
And they will never, ever be on stage. As many books as I write, you will never see a Presger directly on the page.
good.
Because, did y'all watch The X-Files?
A little
Oh,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah, which I loved The X-Files, and I'd watch it, and it was all, ooh, spooky, mysterious, and what's going on? But as soon as they tried to explain it, it was just, that's just stupid.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's just mundane, and it's kind of and it might be a version of there's a Sherlock Holmes story where somebody says, oh, Holmes, how did you figure out these things? It's like magic. And Holmes says, well, this way and this way and this way and this way. And somebody's like, oh, that's not very impressive, that's just simple. And yeah, I'm never going to put the Presger on the page, because otherwise they're not going to be what I want them to be. Now the translators I love putting on the page because they're just super fun.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I'll admit, and I watched an interview you did with Adrian not too long ago where you two talked about aliens, and you both expressed the obstacles as a sci-fi writer to create a believable alien that's not human, right? That's not just us, I can never pronounce this word,
Anthropomorphized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah. So I'm glad that they will always be this mysterious really force, right? That humans can't even grasp, and we need these, right? These intermediaries,
Yeah.
translators.
Well, and that's part of why the Geck, for instance, you only sort of see the Geck. You don't actually see them at all in translation state. You only see their mech. But in Provenance, you sort of see the Geck, but you don't. All you see is a few tentacles, right? Everything else is underwater. That's another one. If I know more about the Geck than I'm going to put on the page, but if I brought the Geck up out of the water, they wouldn't be half as cool, right? And partly for that reason, as you say.
Excellent. And also, so then you may not be able to answer this question because then my next question, because you may want to keep it for the mystery, but the climax at the end when reality spirals, right? That the translator translator Doll, right? Translator Doll,
Translator Dlar.
she's attacked and she just rips into reality. How, as again, you might not be able to answer this, but how did that happen? What about her power that came to be?
So I guess I should say spoiler in case anybody's it's already hopefully been demonstrated in the book that the translators can sort of open up pathways.
Mhm.
And my thinking there in that scene was that Dlar was about to open up a pathway to get the heck out of the way, but she didn't move fast enough. And as often happens when you're in the middle of doing something and somebody stabs you, you just go, bleh, it all goes wrong. That was what I was thinking. I didn't put it specifically on the page, so probably it's confused some people.
Okay. No, it was more I was wondering like what I knew they could open doors and passageways, but I wonder if there was like some other power that would that had been used at that point.
No, it's that same
No.
one, but it's not controlled because she's just been stabbed.
Okay. Um, excellent. Brian, do you have a question? I know I just jumped into two questions, but do you have one for Anne, or do you want to pass it back to?
Yeah, I've got another one. So one thing, this is I guess more craft focused than like content of the story. But looking at Ven's chapters being told in like first person narration, um, I think I appreciated those chapters because the translators are already, I guess, more difficult to understand. They're not quite human, obviously. They're not quite the same. And they're having a pretty different experience, especially, yeah, being that, I don't know, the process that we get of being raised to potentially become a translator there. But were there any other reasons, particularly why you chose to write just that one character's chapters in like first person um, and switched back into third person for like Anae's chapters and Reet's chapters?
I am not 100% sure why I wanted to do Reet and NA in third person, but they felt like they needed to be in third person. Sometimes that's just a feel thing, right? But it always benefits looking at it from a more pragmatic point of view, and I don't necessarily have answers for those. For Kven, first of all, I liked how weird it was to have Kven just say, and of course I ate the leg, or whatever, because you can't do that in third person. We sort of pretend like close third doesn't have a narrator, but close third definitely has a narrator. And my narrator would have had to have some kind of opinion, even if a suppressed opinion about what was going on. And I didn't want that. I wanted everything to seem like this is, of course, completely natural. And I didn't sit down and think about that. I just went, oh, Kven has to be in first person. But then afterwards I was like, no, there are real technical reasons why Kven needs to be in first person to get the atmosphere that I want. I still am not 100% sure why I stuck with third for the other two chapters. I could have gone first for both of them. But I didn't feel like that was going to work as well. And I'm still not sure why.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Brian.
like it. I mean, I like that approach of going with the feel more than I know some authors are very kind of plotting focused, and they plan every aspect of the story so meticulously, including the narration and everything that they plan on doing. So I definitely appreciate the going for the feel of it, and then later kind of understanding why does it work.
Yeah,
I like that.
I personally believe that a lot of the work for writing actually happens in your unconscious, and that writing is often a question of just sort of tricking your unconscious into doing what you need it to do. But it can be important to listen to what your unconscious is telling you and then consciously make a decision about that. That said, there are plenty of writers who, as you say, they plot everything out very meticulously. And it works very well for them, and they turn out great work. And some of them are people who I love and admire, and I have no freaking idea how they can possibly do that, because I don't know I can't outline, because how do I know what's gonna happen until I've written the scene before it, right? I can't do that. But there's no wrong way to do it. Whatever way gets you the story is the right way to do it.
Excellent. And to continue with a question about process, because you write scene by scene and see how and you watch how it grows. Were there any um, walls or like obstacles in the creation of this story, or did it go fairly smoothly? Were there any dead ends? Can you share with us that process?
So this book mostly it got written much more quickly than I'm used to. for whatever reason. It flowed very smoothly until I hit what my editor called the spiral of death. And at that point, I actually sent my draft to my editor and was like, I'm stuck here. And I know where I want to end up, because I don't start a book unless I know where I'm going to end up. I just don't know how I'm getting there, if that makes sense. And I'm like, I'm stuck here. I know I need to end up here, but I'm like, I don't know what the next scene is. I don't know where to go. And I've tried sitting with it very often. When I'm stuck like that, I'll go read a bunch of nonfiction. I'll take walks. I'll put the writing down for a week or two, you know, make sure I eat nutritiously and get a lot of sleep, daydream a lot. All those things are good things to do. And it wasn't working. And so I ended up talking, I'd had a phone call with my editor. She was great, Priyanka Krishnan. She's not at Orbit anymore, sadly. She's moved elsewhere. She ended up talking to me about something else about NA's arc. She was like, well, I noticed this. And talking about that, I was like, oh, I see where I need to go now with the spiral of death. Which was, it was an odd thing, but just clearing up a character line, which is often how it happens. I find that when you're stuck or you're upset, you know, you're not happy with something, very often the problem isn't there. The problem is somewhere before. If you feel like you can't move to where you need to move, you've made a mistake earlier that's blocked that path off. And the feeling that you can't go forward, to me, is my unconscious saying you've done something wrong. You have to fix something before you can go further. And so, but that was the one big hiccup with that book, was the spiral of death. Was I just had to stop and, you know, talk to people and figure out where I was going. But I have to say, Translation State got written down abnormally smoothly. In fact, it was kind of my pandemic book. I was not under contract for something, and I was, like all of us, kind of stuck inside the house. Playing, my kids introduced me to Stardew Valley and Minecraft, and I was playing lots of Minecraft and Stardew Valley, which are awesome. And finally my brain was like, Anne, you have to do something. And here's what you're going to do. And I was like, fine, all right. And wrote up a proposal and sold it to the publisher and finished it up. So I guess that book probably started in a different way than a lot of books, but I think a lot of writers have weird pandemic books. You know, Martha Wells' Witch King, and Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society, and Titanium Noir is another one, I think, is another pandemic book. There's a bunch of them.
I think many of us produce weird things in the pandemic. It was a weird time for all of us. Well, your mention of Martha Wells is a good segue to something I wanted to ask you. I'm also a huge...
Yes, I know what you're going to ask me. If Pirate Exiles of the Death Moons is a Murderbot nod, and it absolutely is, 100%.
No, I know it's a Murderbot nod. But my question is, I'm curious about your relationship with Martha and how you influence each other. Your opinion on Murderbot.
I love Murderbot. I am publicly on record as having said that I love Murderbot.
Yes,
yeah.
But more
amplify.
Yeah. Like and as a writer, like, how have you read her books and I guess been inspired by them or applied in your own work?
So I actually had not read much by Martha Wells, but I had heard of her because, of course, she has had a long career before Murderbot hit it big. But I had not read her work. And then Murderbot came out, and there was a Tumblr post linking to a Tor.com, read the first chapter. And I looked at it and I said, if my readers don't enjoy this, I will eat 10 copies of this book. And because this is clearly something my readers will like. And so I reblogged it. And then, of course, I got my own copy when it came out and read it. And I was like, this is awesome. This is just, y'all know how awesome Murderbot is, right? Murderbot's just awesome. And I sort of hoped that I had sort of contributed to Murderbot's existence. Because to me, Murderbot felt like a sort of cousin of Breq. And I see Jen nodding because Jen's read the trilogy. So And I sort of hoped. And then later on, I saw Martha say that in fact, ancillary justice was in some respects a sort of an influence on the idea of Murderbot. And I was like, oh, that's great. I've won at life already. I don't need to do anything else. And so of course I've read all the Murderbot books, and I've read Witch King. I have not gone back and read her previous stuff. And I've only met her in person a few times. She came through when Witch King came out and did a local event. And I'm often, when they have a science fiction person come through, they often contact me and say, can you come and do an in-person in conversation with, because I'm the local science fiction celebrity, and I always love to do that. And of course I was like, yes, I'm going to come and talk to Martha Wells. Are you kidding me? But and I enjoyed Witch King just a hell of a lot. So that's basically my relationship with Martha Wells. Martha is awesome.
Excellent. Thank you. I have a spoiler alert question. So if anyone's watching or listening to this is about the ending. And again, this may either this may be something you want to keep mysterious, or it's something that I maybe didn't understand. I'm curious about. So I like after the scene where they Reet and Fen go on the ship, and there's this attack, and Reet gets his neck cut, and she puts the bandage on his neck, and then I like that they had feelings for each other, right? But they could never openly say it, and you dance back and forth between their internal monologue on do they feel the same way, do they not? And I kept on in my mind predicting that they were going to come together, but I also knew the other option was that they would have a biomech, that they would they would stay together but combine with their biomech, right? But at the end, when Ine sees them, they're together but separate. Did I not understand correctly?
They are the same person now. So what was your question? I've forgotten it.
Yeah, no.
Oh, how did NA know what the difference was between, or how that they were?
Yeah, so I assumed that they had come together in some way. But how was Ine able to, because
To recognize them?
yeah, because I think my ignorance came from while reading about the process of two beings coming together. I assumed that it would be like completely after the process was over, it would just be a person where the personalities had meshed so completely you couldn't tell the difference. But I was surprised to learn that, and they could go, "Oh yeah, I see that. That's Reet, that's Gwen." So can you talk more about the product of
yeah. So the product of the merging, it ends up being two bodies that are the same person.
Okay.
And which this is spoilers to people who read through the trilogy. We'll have a moment in the book in translation state where they go, oh, that explains something that was going on in the trilogy. But so, and I sort of tried to hint at that, but I was also, to be fair, I was not being kind to those of you who had not read the trilogy. And I was assuming some previous knowledge about the Presger Translators. But yeah, so you've got two different bodies, and my thought was that what you've got is a sort of weird smearing of the physical characteristics of both people. It's not going to be they're going to come out of it looking like Reet and then the other one looking like Fen, because why would they? Because they've been one big puddle of goo for a while, you know. There's also no reason they shouldn't come out looking like completely different people that you wouldn't even recognize, I guess. But where would the fun be in that? Unless if I need it for a story, I guess I can pull that one out. But so that's kind of what I was thinking, but you're right. I was not terribly specific about it on the page, and I was mostly hinting about it, where, for instance, I mentioned that there were two of the teacher, but Kven only talks about the teacher as though they're a single person. There's at least two of Translator Dlar, but Kven only talks about Translator Dlar, and Saymet only talks about Translator Dlar as though they're one person. But I was not explicit about saying it.
Excellent, thank you. So I think I think Virginia is
Someone
prompting.
new.
Yes. Um, Fine. Well, anyway, another question, and that I don't want to forget. And this goes back to sort of a little bit of process, but also your history. When I've read your bio, and you mentioned this in the beginning of the talk, that you worked many different kinds of jobs before writing took off. Can you talk about how your different jobs, like I read that you were a waitress, informed has informed your writing, and do you consciously pull from your previous experiences in different jobs, or are there ideas that you got from different jobs that then you have put into writing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I absolutely do pull from the different jobs. In some ways, when I was a kid, I would read writers' bios and they would have these big long lists of really cool occupations, like worked as a tuna fisher and a land surveyor and an architect and and I'd be like, wow, what a cool life. My life is so boring. But then when I went to make my list of jobs, I was like, actually, my list isn't too bad. But most of that time was spent waiting tables, quite frankly. Uh, it, Waiting tables kind of has given me a number of things. It's given me a sense of the way that speaking to other people is very much a script and about communicating willingness to deal with somebody, communicating goodwill and then making your transaction, and many of the other things are sort of decorations around that to show everything's fine, everything's good, now I'll bring you your lunch. Everything's fine, everything's good, thank you for the lunch. And how much communication carries a sort of things that aren't in the words that you say, but the fact that you're saying the words. That sounds like a weird thing to say, but that's one of the things that I feel like I picked up from waiting tables is thinking about that very consciously. It also gives me an interest in things like where food comes from and who's serving the food, like who's cleaning the houses. When you spend a long time doing jobs like that, and then you're like, well, somebody's waiting tables on the space station, somebody's cleaning the bathroom on the space station. Um, that's definitely something that I've brought out of those jobs. The receptionist jobs, which were mostly temp jobs, were very similar. And the land surveying was super interesting. There were a number of really wild specific experiences doing the land surveying that I could, take up time talking about my weird experiences, but they've definitely informed how I think about when disaster strikes, or how things get built or done. And so they've all been super useful, and of course through all of them you meet different sorts of people who do different sorts of things, and that becomes part of your sort of vocabulary for what kinds of people and what kinds of things they'll do or say that you're going to use later in stories.
How can you? I'm curious to know, as a reader, um, more about the universe. Like, reading translation state, did you, um, yeah, like how did you think Anne took? Because I thought the book stood on it. Translation state could stand on its own because I enjoyed it, and I
Good.
anything um, about the world. Um, but Jen, as someone who had read the trilogy, did you have that moment that Anne mentioned where, like, oh yeah, so that's how the translators, or that's how that works?
Yeah, the translators are part of the trilogy, but I really enjoyed getting to know sort of their background in this book, and this takes place after the trilogy. So, like, there's the Sphene. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Is like the group that they come from is sort of more involved in the trilogy. It's more about them and the Radch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing any of this correctly.
So when people ask me, I say Rajai. However, Raj space is large. There are lots of different languages and accents and dialects. So however you say it is right somewhere. That's my official answer when people ask me how to pronounce things. Sorry.
Oh no. So it's more about all of them and sort of there's, I don't know how to explain it too much without giving spoilers, but there's sort of stuff going down and sort of tumult of with the leadership and maybe a changing of the way things are done, and this rise of the AIs who want their own rights. And it's really very, I loved the trilogy. And the way you wrote the AIs especially just really was fantastic. And I was thinking when you mentioned that you were a waitress, that is that where the tea, there's this importance about tea? Like, are you a tea drinker, or did that come from
Well,
from
I am absolutely a tea drinker, and I have been since I was a kid, which is weird for an American, right? Because in the US, most people, if you drink tea, you're drinking iced tea, and most adults drink coffee. But at any rate, yes, I've been a tea drinker, and I'm also a big fan of C.J. Cherry's Foreigner series, which I don't know if you have read, and I highly recommend them. Start with the first one, and if you don't like the first one, don't continue. There's like 24 books. But tea is, although not necessarily Camellia sinensis, because it's not on Earth, is really important to the Atevi, who are an alien, well, they're not alien, it's their native planet, and humans are the aliens, but tea is really important to the culture that we meet in those books. And a number of the things in those books were a direct influence on what I was doing with Ancillary Justice. And so I said, well, I'll put that in as sort of a, a hat tip. Why not? And also, I like tea. So, but like by the second book, I had to do research. There was just no getting around it, right? So I did a whole bunch of tea research. So that's really where the tea came from. And once I'd put it in there, it became something I could use. So like at the opening of Ancillary Sword, as I think only Jen will know, there's a scene where one character is like, we can't leave port without dishes. We need good dishes. And that I only had that happen because I needed something to amp up the emotion in that scene. Otherwise it wasn't going to hold interest. My dog is losing his mind over here. Okay. And so I said, all right, dishes, why not? Dishes make sense. That's a practical detail. But once they were there, I could just keep pulling out dishes, and suddenly it becomes a theme or a symbol or and it became a whole huge thing. And I've really been charmed by the number of readers who really love that character because she cares so much about the dishes, right? She's always the dishes. Nobody gets the best dishes except the best people, and that's just a super lot of fun. But that's basically where that came from.
Okay, thanks.
You both mentioned the AI. That Jen said she liked how you treated AI in the trilogy. So during the trilogy, was there an uprising for rights that then the AI were able to get them and they're established in translation state?
I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say. I will just encourage you to read the trilogy. I will say, though, that when I brought the first Presger translator on stage in Ancillary Sword, and I realized how quickly I would have to take her permanently off stage. And I was very sad because she had been so fun to write. And I said to myself, I tried to keep her on as long as I could, and I absolutely could not keep her on very long at all. It was just the book demanded that I do particular things. And I said, all right, but I'm going to make up for it in the third book. I'm going to have as much of translator Zayat as I possibly can, because she's so much fun. But it's funny because when I'm on like Tumblr or Blue Sky now, I don't go on Twitter anymore. And I would see somebody say, oh my gosh, I've just come to Translator Leckie and I love her so much. She is my new favorite character. And then I just wait. And like a half an hour later, I see somebody post, why did you do that, Anne? And then I go, oh, to myself, just wait till the third book. I'll make it all up to you.
And so did you have this seed in the back of your head that not only do you want to write about it in the third book, but then explore it even more? Like for a long time, had you had this desire to explore this part of the Radch universe?
I did actually. Reet is actually a character whose idea predates my having actually written Ancillary Justice. I just hadn't found anything to do with him that was going to make sense. I knew his situation. I knew the various trouble that he could have gotten into being who and what he is. But I hadn't found a whole plot for Reet. And so that was the thing that when I was sitting there during the plague playing Minecraft over and over again, that I was like, oh, all right, now I've got a story. It helped to have fleshed out some of the stuff in the trilogy that helped make a basis for things to do with that very old character.
Right. And the AI in translation state, there was a conversation that I think the AI had with I think Ine about like killing was like
Oh,
killing humans. That was like, oh yeah, like I've killed so many humans you don't even um but
I
my,
killed way more than 36 people in a
yeah,
single day.
yeah. So my question is, and this is I think the third time I said this, you may not want to keep this mysterious, but yeah, in what is their role in this universe, in this book, or is it like how much power do they have? um what's did you purposely did you hold yourself back from exploring that in this book, or is that something you have for a future book? Yeah, let's talk more
So
about.
I have to be 100% honest. Sphene is there as fan service. Sphene is there because I knew people who had read the trilogy would go, it's Sphene, look, right? And also because it would be fun, because where Sphene goes, chaos happens. And that was just, going to be a thing. Most of the artificial intelligences, bleh, I do speak English. I swear it's my first language. Artificial intelligences in Radch space are either space stations or warships, and Sphene is a warship.
Okay.
And very specifically, Sphene is a very old warship from before Radch space became Radch space. And so Sphene hates a lot of the power structure in Radch space and hates the Radchai in a very personal way that many people who aren't Radchai don't. This isn't true of many of the other warships in Radch space. One of whom is the main character of the trilogy is a warship. So yeah, and that's part of the joke is Sphene, in the course of prosecuting a war, has killed lots and lots and lots and lots of people. So that's really what that's there for. So she's kind of been explored some in the trilogy. She's a fairly major character in the third book. I may or may not poke into her experiences in the future. I don't know. There's a lot there to make stories, but I honestly don't know if I would go in that direction or not.
Okay. So, and I promised in the email that this talk would be like 45 minutes, an hour. So I'll leave Jen, Brian, or Virginie. Do you have any final questions that you'd like to ask Anne? If not, I have my last question, which is the going forward with the Radch universe. Do you know where you're going next? Are there going to be more books following translation state? What's the next step for this universe?
So I am under contract for another book set in Radch space. And I am about 30,000 words into that book right now. And I really can't say very much about it. Because 30,000 words is only a third of the book, if that. And I'm not 100%, I know where I want to end up, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. So that's what's next. What's after that, I honestly don't know. But presumably something. I'll have to see what I feel. It may be time for another fantasy. I don't know.
Excellent. And actually, that just made me think of one more thing. You mentioned before about reading readers' reactions to characters. Do you, in real time, alter the universe? And like for example, you just mentioned that Sphene was a sort of like a fan head nod to those who had enjoyed him before. Do you take reader feedback and then integrate that into what direction you go and who you're going to develop and the universe, or do you just kind of
That's
get reader feedback and go, "Oh, that's nice, but I have my ideas."
both. It depends on what the feedback is. So sometimes, for instance, I wrote the first book and I got a Tumblr account because then I could see people talking about my book on Tumblr, and that was exciting and cool and validating. And one of the things I discovered reading on Tumblr was the number of, at least my readers who posted, who were feeling like there were no characters who were asexual in books, and that was going to be important to them. And I said, well, I can make not a large change, but I can deliberately say that a particular character is asexual just to say there it is, right? Not, because I can provide that something for my readers who I have to admit, I feel kind of protective toward a lot of my readers, partly because they say nice things about me, and then I say, oh, I'm fond of you now. Uh, and I was like, well, that's a little thing, and I can provide that. And so sometimes I'll do something like that. Or with Sphene, I'll be like, I need to have somebody turn up in this scene. I could make a new warship, but I know there are readers who will just be very happy to see Sphene. And also the idea that it would be Sphene is kind of hilarious for people who have read the trilogy. And so that's what I did. I was thinking about my readers there. Sometimes a reader will say, this was one that made me angry. In the third book in the trilogy, you're really positive about using medicine to deal with mental health things, and you should stop doing that because that's terrible and that's not the way to deal with mental health. And I just deleted that email, but that's not something I'm going to take on board because that's bull. So if I hear a reader critique or a reader want, and I think, actually, that will fit my project, then I will consider doing it. If I hear something that actually I think is cool, but it won't fit my project, I will put it aside for some other project. If I hear something that I'm like, no, just no, then no, I'm not going to. So I don't really feel that I'm beholden to folks' comments, but I am definitely paying attention to the ones that I see. I do think that's important. I don't think I'm here to write at the behest of readers, but I also think it's important to think about how readers are reacting to things and do as well as I can be as specific about what I'm trying to do for readers as I can. I can't control how everybody reads the story, but I can make it as much what I want it to be with the help of knowing how people are reacting. It's a complicated topic, and I don't know if I'm expressing myself very well.
Well, you expressed it well. No, that's because in these chats and people who will perhaps watch them in the group, we have writers and artists who are curious about I mean, we live in an age where we can get constant feedback, right? With social media and Tumblr and so and you answered it well. It seems like both, right? Like you
Yeah,
or you
it's
take all
both.
of it. Yeah. All right, excellent. Any Jen, Brian, Virginie, Virginie, your mic's not working, but any final thoughts, final questions?
No, just thank you for taking the time to talk with us. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. This has been just lovely. I always enjoy talking to folks.
Thank you, Anne. And I said to Jen and Brian that I wish there was more readers. There seems to be a lot of interest when I plan these, but then people have conflicts and everything. But at the same time, when there's a small group like this, we can really all ask what we want to ask.
Yeah. Well, and I think recording it is a good plan. As I said earlier, not everyone is going to be able to say, yes, I can be recorded, and that's understandable. But when it can happen, it's great because people have conflicts, This is what technology is for.
Mhm. Yes, and I'll watch it again and put
Take out where my mic didn't work.
yeah, cut out the audio things and then timestamp, your the different topics we talked about because it was very valuable, Anne, and thank you. And it's to me it makes the reading experience even deeper, because I mean, we learn what happens behind the scenes in the creation process, and it's so. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. This has been lovely.
Yes. All right. Well, have a good morning, Brian. Good night, Jen. Good night, Virginie, and good afternoon, late morning, or afternoon, Anne. Right.
Yes. It's afternoon.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you, Anne.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.